There's a saying in the outer reaches that every great warrior eventually finds something worth more than victory. I didn't believe that for a long time. But then I met Marcus Vale, and I watched him make soup. Let me start where it matters. Not the battlefield. Not the command bridge of the ISV Relentless, where I once stood with blood on my boots and stars dying behind me. Not the negotiating tables where I'd watched empires fold like paper under the right kind of pressure. No, let me start in a kitchen. A real kitchen, the kind that smells like roasted grain and something sweet and charred at the same time. The kind with steam curling off pots and a single overhead light casting everything in soft yellow. The kind of kitchen that makes you forget, for just a moment, that outside those walls there are 700 crew members, a warship the size of a small moon, and a galaxy that has never quite decided whether it loves or fears the species that built it. The Vashari Prime was 3 days out of Helinox Station when I first went down to the lower deck kitchens. I want to be clear, I'm not the kind of commander who wanders into the kitchen. I'm Zaretha Velkan, commander class of the Vashari Dominion Fleet, 3rd seat of the Grand Council by appointment, and until very recently the most feared tactical mind in the Keldoran corridor. I don't wander anywhere. I move with purpose. I arrive, I assess, I decide. But I hadn't slept in 40 hours. And someone, I still don't know who, had left a small ceramic bowl of something outside my quarters door. Something that smelled like pine resin and warm bread, and some kind of spice I couldn't name. Something that, when I ate 3 bites of it at 2 in the morning while standing in my doorway still in my uniform, made me close my eyes for the first time in days. So yes, I went down to the kitchen. Not because I was hungry, because I needed to know who made that. The lower deck kitchens on a Vashari warship are not glamorous spaces. They're functional, long counter surfaces of polished gray composite, industrial cold storage units along the back wall, cooking stations arranged in rows like workbenches, which is essentially what they are. The ship feeds 723 hours a rotation, and the kitchen staff operates in 3 overlapping shifts. The food is calibrated for nutritional efficiency across 12 different species' biological requirements. It is, by design, not meant to be remarkable. Which is why, when I stepped through the lower deck kitchen hatch at 0230 and found a single light on over Station 4, and a human standing there with his back to me and a pan in his hand, I stopped. He was singing, very quietly, barely above his breath, some old earth melody I didn't recognize, low, rhythmic, with a kind of melancholy built into its bones that doesn't translate across species, but somehow lands anyway. He was singing and he was stirring something in the pan, and he wasn't wearing the standard kitchen crew uniform. He was wearing a plain gray shirt with the sleeves pushed up past his elbows and a dark apron, and he had flour on his left forearm, and he clearly had no idea anyone was watching him. I stood in the hatch doorway for longer than I should have. There's something about watching a person who thinks they're alone, genuinely alone. That tells you more about them than any personnel file ever could. He moved like he owned the space, not arrogantly, not the way officers move when they want to be seen. He moved like a person who has worked in a space so long it has become an extension of his own body. Every reach, every pivot, every adjustment of heat, nothing wasted. No unnecessary motion, the kind of efficiency that doesn't come from training, it comes from years, decades maybe. I cleared my throat. He didn't flinch, didn't spin around, just said without turning, the bowl outside your door, was it okay? I wasn't sure about the spice ratio for Vashari biology, first time calibrating for a commander-class physiology. I stepped inside. You left that? Yes, Commander. He turned then, and I saw him for the first time properly. Human male, mid-40s by Earth reckoning, maybe a little older, the kind of age that sits quietly on a person, the kind you have to look for. Dark hair going silver at the temples, a jaw that had seen better razors, eyes that were, and I remember noticing this clearly, very, very still. Not dull, not tired. Still, the way deep water is still. You knew I hadn't eaten, I said. You've been running 12-hour rotations without meal breaks for 4 days. It's in the duty log. Someone should have flagged it earlier. He said it simply. No judgment, just a fact. And you decided to personally address a commanding officer's nutrition. He almost smiled. Someone had to. I looked at the pan. What are you making now? Something for the Keth crew members on the overnight shift. They've been on cold rations since Helinoch because the standard heating protocol burns their mucous membrane equivalent. I'm adjusting. He paused. It's not complicated, just takes attention. I pulled out a stool from under the counter and sat down. I don't know why. I genuinely don't know why I did that. I don't sit on stools in kitchens. That's not a thing I do. But I sat down. "What's your name?" I asked. He set down the pan and turned to face me properly. "Marcus Vale, Junior Nutrition Officer, Lower Deck Assignment." I noted the rank, Junior, bottom of the enlisted kitchen staff hierarchy. I noted his eyes, still as stone. "The Vale," I said, "that's not a human name." "It was a gift," he said, "from a friend a long time ago." I should have gone back to my quarters. I had a strategic briefing in 6 hours, a council report to review, and a border dispute along the Keldoran edge that was going to require my full concentration. Instead, I watched Marcus Vale cook for the next 2 hours. And I couldn't tell you why, except that something about him made the noise in my head go quiet. The Vashari Prime had picked up 3 human crew members at Helinoch Station as part of the Joint Species Integration Initiative, a diplomatic exercise that the Grand Council had been pushing for 2 cycles, an attempt to normalize human presence aboard Dominion vessels following the Accord of 12 Suns. Humans were newer to the galactic stage than most species chose to remember. They'd been accepted into the Accord only 40 years prior, and there were still factions within the Dominion who regarded them the way you regard a small animal that has surprised you once, cautious, uncertain, not quite willing to turn your back. The integration initiative paired humans with low-visibility, low-risk crew roles, kitchen staff, maintenance auxiliary, data transcription. The idea was familiarity without exposure. Let the crew see humans working. Let the prejudice soften quietly. Marcus Vale had been assigned to lower deck kitchen work. I had not read his file before that night because junior kitchen staff files do not cross a commander's desk. That's not a gap in protocol, that's just the way things work. I had 700 crew members. I knew my officers. I knew my senior enlisted. I did not, under normal circumstances, know the overnight cook on lower deck. The next morning, I read his file. It was thin, strangely thin. Name Marcus Vale. Age 47 Earth calendar. Species human. Previous postings 4. 3 civilian catering contracts aboard mid-class transport vessels, 1 hospitality assignment on Helinoch Station. No disciplinary flags, no commendations, no prior military service listed. Education, culinary certification, Armstrong Institute, Luna Colony. Basic nutrition science, Accord Standard. That was it. I read it twice. Then I pulled up the broader network search, something I don't normally do for enlisted kitchen staff, and searched the name. Marcus Vale. The results were sparse. An Armstrong Institute graduate record from 22 years ago, a reference on a Helinoch Station catering registry, a personnel transfer form filed 8 months ago listing him as available for integration posting. No photographs in the public record, none. That in the age of pangalactic data networks is almost impossible. I sat with that for a while. Then I went back to my strategic briefing and told myself it was nothing. The thing about command is that you develop instincts you can't always explain. You meet someone and something in your nervous system, not your brain, not your logic flags, not danger exactly, not threat. Something more like, pay attention to this one. That flag doesn't care about rank, doesn't care about context. It doesn't know that the person standing at Station 4 at 0230 is listed in the ship manifest as a junior nutrition officer. It just says, there is more here than you can see. Over the next week, I found reasons to be in the lower deck kitchen more often than any commanding officer has ever found reasons to be there. I told myself I was conducting informal crew assessments, which is a legitimate thing that commanders do. I told myself I was following up on the Keth dietary modifications he'd mentioned, also legitimate. I told myself I wasn't doing anything unusual. The third night I came down, he had a pot of something going that filled the entire lower deck corridor with a smell like rain on warm stone. and he was teaching the two junior Vashari kitchen crew members how to properly dice a root vegetable from Helenoch's agricultural sector that apparently required a specific knife angle, or it went bitter. He taught with the patience of someone who has explained the same thing 100 times and genuinely doesn't mind explaining it 101st. He didn't condescend. He didn't perform patience. He just waited, adjusted, tried again. I watched the younger of the two Vashari crew, a 20-cycle girl named Peshta who was easily flustered and had nearly resigned twice that month according to her supervisor, get the cut right on the fourth try, and the way Marcus looked at her when she did, just a small nod and a quiet, "There you go." It was enough to make Peshta stand about 3 centimeters taller for the rest of the shift. That's a specific skill, getting someone to stand taller with 2 words. Not everyone has it. On the 8th day, I came down to find him sitting alone at the counter, the kitchen in between shifts, a single mug in front of him. I sat across from him. He poured a second mug without asking and pushed it toward me. We sat in silence for a while. It didn't feel awkward. That was the strange part. Silence with most people, even people I've known for years, has texture to it. You feel the shape of what nobody's saying. With Marcus, the silence was just quiet. "You don't look like a cook," I said eventually. He took a sip. "What do I look like?" I considered. "I'm not sure yet." He nodded at that, not dismissively, like I'd said something reasonable. "Where are you from?" I asked. "Originally." "Earth," he said. "A city called Portland. It rains there." "I miss the rain." "You miss rain?" "You don't have rain on Vashar Prime." "We have precipitation events. They're efficient. They're not the same thing." He almost smiled again, that near smile that I'd started to watch for. "No, rain isn't efficient. That's kind of the point." I looked at my mug. "You've been out here a long time." "Yeah." "What brought you to fleet postings? Most humans in the integration initiative are recent graduates." A pause, not evasive, just a genuine pause, like he was choosing his words carefully for an honest reason rather than a deceptive one. "I needed somewhere quiet," he said finally. "A warship is not quiet." "Kitchens are." He looked at the dark surface of his mug. "Kitchen's the only place I know where the job is just making something. You put things together and it either works or it doesn't. No politics, no projections, nobody's asking you to hold a line or take a position. You just cook. And that's enough for you." He looked up at me then. His eyes, up close and in the direct light, were not the color I'd initially thought. I'd thought brown. They were actually a very dark green, the kind of color that only shows itself when you look directly. "For now," he said, "yeah, that's enough." The incident on the 14th day started not in the kitchen, but in the main crew refectory during first shift meal service. I was not present. I heard about it afterward from 3 different sources, which is how I know the account is accurate. When 3 different people tell you the same story with the same key details, you stop questioning the facts and start questioning the implications. What happened was this. A senior Vashari officer, commander rank 3rd, a decorated tactical analyst named Serveth Dawn who had been with the fleet for 20 years, and who had, in the past 3 weeks, made no attempt to disguise his contempt for the human integration crew, came through the refectory line during first shift, and when the serving station display showed that the morning protein blend had been reformulated, demanded to know who had changed it. The answer was Marcus. He'd adjusted the protein ratios after reviewing crew health metrics for the 3rd week, and identifying a pattern of fatigue indicators in the overnight shift crew that he'd traced back to a specific amino acid deficiency in the standard blend for Vashari biology under high exertion schedules. Serveth Dawn, again, 20-year fleet veteran, decorated senior rank, walked into the kitchen, found Marcus at Station 4, and told him in front of 6 crew members that unauthorized modification of crew nutrition was a disciplinable offense, that human personnel on integration postings were specifically restricted from independent operational modifications, and that if Marcus touched the protein blend again, he would have him reassigned to waste processing. Serveth Dawn is tall, even by Vashari standards. He's got the commanding physical presence that comes from 20 years of being the most important person in most rooms. His voice carries. He knows how to fill a space with authority. The 6 crew members who were present all reported the same thing. Marcus Vale did not step back. He didn't raise his voice, didn't get defensive. He just listened the way you listen to something that interests you. And then when Servith finished, he said, "The modification was documented and flagged for nutritional review as per Standard Protocol 7, Section 12. That's the section covering proactive health optimization. It's not unauthorized. It was a protocol-compliant improvement." He paused. "Commander," Servith Don told him, he was wrong about the protocol. Marcus reached past him, not aggressively, just calmly, pulled a reference tablet from the counter, opened it to the relevant section, and held it out. Servith looked at it. Servith Don did not take the tablet. He left the kitchen. The 6 crew members present said that after he left, Marcus went back to what he was doing. He didn't say anything, didn't look at anyone, just went back to cooking. When crew member Peshta apparently started to say something, presumably something along the lines of, "Are you okay?" or possibly, "That was incredible," Marcus just shook his head slightly, not unkindly, and she went back to work too. I called Servith Don to my office that afternoon. He was polished about it. He gave me the version of events that made him look like a man following proper procedure, a senior officer ensuring integration personnel stayed within their designated parameters. He was careful and professional, and I've known Servith for 8 years, and I know when he's managing me. "He was correct about the protocol," I said. "In a narrow technical sense. Not narrow, the protocol is explicit. The modification was documented and compliant." Servith said nothing for a moment. Then, "Commander, with respect, I understand the diplomatic purpose of this integration exercise. I support the Council's initiative. But I have concerns about a junior human crew member who appears to operate with a certain confidence that is not commensurate with his rank." "Confidence," I said. "It can be a problem in junior crew of any species." He cited the correct protocol to a senior officer and was proven right. The manner in which he did it was calm and factual. I looked at Servith directly. "I'd like more of that on this ship, not less." He left my office with the careful posture of a man who has been corrected and is choosing not to feel it yet. That night, I went down to the kitchen again. I told myself it was a routine check-in. I believed myself less than I had the night before. Marcus was making something with a sweet smell, definitely from Earth, something with fruit and caramelized sugar, something that had no practical nutritional optimization purpose and was clearly just being made because someone wanted to make it. I sat on my stool. "Servith Don," I said. Not quite a word, just a sound of acknowledgement. "That must have been unpleasant." "It wasn't." He didn't look up from the pan. "He's worried. People who are worried about things outside their control tend to push on the things they think they can control. He can't control whether I'm here, so he's trying to control how I behave while I'm here." A pause. "I've met the type. He's a 20-year fleet veteran." "I know. He has significant influence with the Council liaison on board." "I know that too." He tilted the pan slightly, watching the surface of whatever was in it. "Are you warning me about something, Commander?" I considered the question. "I'm not sure." He looked up then, directly at me. And for the second time in 2 weeks, I had that feeling. The one my instincts kept throwing at me. The pay attention to this one feeling. "You want to ask me something?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Your file is thin," I said. He was quiet for a moment, looked back at the pan. "Yes, it is." "Unusually thin, for someone your age." "Yes." "No photographs in public record." "No." "That's unusual." "It is." I waited. The kitchen was very quiet around us. The hum of equipment, the soft creak of the ship's hull, the distant mechanical heartbeat of the engines 3 decks below. "Are you going to tell me why?" I asked. He set the pan down, turned off the heat, turned around and leaned against the counter, and looked at me with those very still, very dark green eyes. "Probably not tonight," he said. "But eventually. Maybe. Is it something I should be concerned about, from a security standpoint?" He thought about it, actually thought. I could see him genuinely considering the question. "No," he said finally. "I'm not a threat to this ship or anyone on it. I'd give you my word, but I imagine you'd want something more concrete than that." "What would you give me that's more concrete?" Time, he said, and the food is good, that near smile. I looked at him for a long moment. All right, I said. Time. Part 2, What the Galaxy Remembers. The thing about being the commander of a warship is that the ship never stops, but sometimes you do. Not intentionally, not by choice. Just you blink, and the last 3 weeks have happened without you fully inhabiting them, and somewhere between the border dispute reports and the council relays and the maintenance logs and the diplomatic briefings, actual life has been quietly going on without your direct supervision. That realization hit me on day 21. I was standing in my observation window at standard 0 hour, looking at the star field that had become so familiar over the past weeks that I almost stopped seeing it. And I noticed, really noticed, that I'd had better sleep in the past 2 weeks than in the past 6 months. That the tension in my upper shoulder joints, the kind that my medical officer had been trying to address with 3 different treatment protocols, had eased. I thought about why. Then I thought about who. And then I did something I almost never do. I felt embarrassed. Not because going to the kitchen was wrong, but because I'd been sitting with this information, thin file, no photographs, the stillness in his eyes, the way he moved like someone who had once occupied a very different kind of space. I'd been sitting with it for 3 weeks and making no real effort to understand it. I'd been accepting the mystery because the mystery was comfortable, and comfort was something I hadn't had in a long time, and some part of me didn't want to break it. That's not a commander's instinct. That's something else. I went to see Fleet Archivist Danu the next morning. Danu is a Vashari elder, 73 cycles, with the kind of memory that was once common among our people before we started outsourcing it to data networks. He's served on fleet vessels for 50 years, has met more species than most ambassadors, and has a particular interest in human affairs that he considers academic and I consider obsessive. I need a search run, I said. Discreet, deep network not restricted to public record. Danu didn't ask why. He's been in fleet service long enough to know that when a commander asks for a discreet search, the reasons are the commander's. I gave him the name. Marcus Vale. And then I added, and I'm not sure what made me do this, also search for Marcus. Just the name, no surname. Cross-referenced with the Keldoran Corridor, the Accord expansion period, human military contact first 40 years. Danu looked at me with the particular expression of someone who has just realized a question is bigger than they initially thought. That's a broad search, Commander. Take the time you need. He came back to me in 14 hours. That's fast for a deep network search. Danu is thorough. The fact that he came back in 14 hours meant one of 2 things. Either he found nothing, or he found something significant enough that he didn't want to sit on it. He sat across from my desk and set a data chip on the surface between us. I want to preface this, he said, by noting that I verified what I found against 4 separate archive nodes, including the sealed Accord military records I have access to through my research license. Because if I hadn't verified it, I wouldn't have believed it. I looked at the chip. I didn't pick it up yet. Tell me, I said. Danu folded his hands on the desk. The name Marcus Vale does not appear in pre-Accord human military records, he said. However, he paused, the name Marcus Aurelius Keel does. The name meant nothing to me. I said so. It wouldn't, Danu said. You would have been very young during the expansion period. Most of what was known about him was classified by the Accord Security Council within 12 years of the events. Officially, he's been designated a historical record under security review, which in practice means the information exists, but public access requires council-level clearance. What did he do? I asked. Danu looked at me steadily. He ended a war, he said. Actually, he ended 3, over the course of 7 years. There isn't a clean word for it in Vashari. In human military terminology, he was a strategic command officer, the most senior rank their early space military had, and he was very, very good at it. I sat back slowly. The Kethdoran War, Danu continued. You know it as a historical event. Most species in the Accord do. A border conflict that destabilized 12 systems for over a decade before the Accord mediated a resolution. What the official record doesn't note, because the information was sealed, is that the Accord's mediation succeeded because a human strategic command officer spent 2 years running covert counterpressure operations that effectively neutralized the military capacity of both sides' hardline factions, opening the political space for negotiation. He paused. His name in those records was Keel, Marcus Aurelius Keel. I let that land. The Kethdoran War. I'd studied it at the academy. It was the textbook case for how territorial disputes escalate. The resolution was held up as an example of multilateral diplomacy. He was never publicly credited, I said. The operations were covert. Credit would have exposed the methods. The methods would have been diplomatically problematic. The Yelhari collapse, I said. Something was connecting, something I should have seen before. 7 years before the Accord expansion, the Yelhari Dominion's military command had a catastrophic leadership failure. 3 generals removed in 8 months, no clear reason given. The entire expansion campaign just stopped. Dinu nodded. Also him. Indirectly, different operation, same strategic objective, prevent a military expansion that would have destabilized the outer corridor and derailed the Accord negotiations. Dinu unfolded his hands. He didn't defeat the Yelhari militarily. He undermined the leadership structure from within: economic pressure, information operations, very precise diplomatic maneuvers that left each general questioning whether the others were loyal. They dissolved themselves. No shots fired. I thought about Marcus Vale standing at Station 4, not stepping back when a 20-year fleet veteran bore down on him. I thought about the stillness in his eyes. And the third, I asked. Dinu hesitated for the first time. The Tethori incident, he said quietly. That one is, the record is significantly more fragmented. It's sealed at the highest level. What I could access was limited. But the outline is this. There was a moment, 28 years ago, when a Tethori faction had positioned assets capable of striking 7 major Accord systems simultaneously. A coordinated strike of that scale, the casualty estimates, had it proceeded, were... He stopped, looked at the chip. The estimates were in the billions. The word landed in the room like a stone in still water. It didn't proceed, I said. No, it didn't. The faction leadership made a series of tactical decisions in a 48-hour window that, by the analysis of every military historian who's looked at it, were irrational, self-defeating. They had the positioning, they had the assets, they chose not to strike and instead fractured internally. He looked up at me. The sealed record mentions a human operative who made contact with the faction leadership in the 36 hours before those decisions were made. Just contact, I said. Just contact, Dinu agreed. Whatever was said in those conversations, the record doesn't contain. I looked at the data chip on my desk. He would have been, what, 23, 24? 23 by the dating. 23 years old. I thought about Peshta, who was 20 cycles old and still learning how to dice a root vegetable. I thought about the junior officers on my command bridge who were 25 and 26 and still wide-eyed at the size of the galaxy. 23. Why did he stop? I asked. All of this and then he just stops. And 20 years later, he's a junior nutrition officer on a Vashari warship. Dinu was quiet for a long moment. The record is incomplete, he said finally. There are references in the fragmented files to an event, approximately 20 years ago, that the records classify as a personal threshold event. The language is vague, but there are medical records attached to the classification, and without being able to access those directly, I can tell you that the date of the event corresponds exactly to the date Marcus Aurelius Keel ceased appearing in any military record. And when did Marcus Vale first appear? Dinu met my eyes. 18 years ago, he said, in a culinary certification program on Luna Colony. I sat with that for a long time after Dinu left. I sat with it through the afternoon briefing, which my second officer ran because I told her I had council correspondence to address. I sat with it through the evening. I sat with it while I ate the meal that appeared outside my quarters, reliable as a tide, every day since the second week, made by a man who had once sat across from the leadership of a faction that wanted to kill billions, and apparently said something that changed their minds. At 0100, I went down to the kitchen. He was there. He always seemed to be there when I came down, and I'd never asked myself whether that was because he kept unusual hours or because he knew when I was coming, and now I suspected the answer was more complicated than I'd wanted to think about. I sat on my stool. He put a mug in front of me. I looked at it for a long time. "Keel," I said. The kitchen was very still. He didn't tense, didn't flinch, didn't do any of the things that people do when they're caught. He just was still. The same stillness as always, but I understood it differently now. That stillness wasn't calm. It wasn't peace. It was the stillness of someone who has been carrying something for so long that the weight has become simply the shape of them. "Deneu's thorough," he said quietly. "He is. You knew he'd find it eventually." I suspected. He turned around, looked at me. I wondered when. "Why didn't you say anything? Would you have believed me?" A slight tilt to the question, not rhetorical, genuine. I thought about it honestly. No. Probably not. I figured you'd get there in your own time, or you wouldn't either way. He picked up a cloth and turned it over in his hands without really looking at it. "Does it change something? For the ship, for the crew?" "It changes my understanding of who I'm working with." "Junior nutrition officer, lower deck assignment." He said it without irony. "That's still true. That's still what I am on this ship." "That's not." I started again. "You prevented the Tethori incident. Do you understand what it means to say that out loud? You were 23 years old." I know how old I was. "And you sat across from a faction leadership that was 48 hours from killing billions of people, and you, what? Talked them out of it." He set down the cloth. "No," he said. "I didn't talk them out of it." "Then what?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. "I made them see it," he said finally. "What it would actually look like, not the strategic objective, not the territorial gain, the actual thing, the actual consequence. I don't know. I was very young and very arrogant, and I thought I knew how to use information as a weapon, and I walked into that room and I did everything I was trained to do, and by the end of the conversation the faction leader was crying." He said the last word like it cost him something. He was a soldier. 40 years of service. He'd made hard decisions his entire career. And he sat there and cried. And then they didn't strike. And then they didn't strike. He looked at his hands. And I walked out of that building and I sat on a step in whatever passed for a plaza in that part of the station, and he stopped. I don't know how long I sat there, a long time. Someone brought me something to eat eventually. I don't remember who. And I thought, I'm 23 years old and I just moved nations by making a man cry, and I didn't know how to feel about that. "You felt that power." "I felt that power," he agreed quietly. "And I felt something else, about what kind of person uses that power, about what you become using it." I sat with that. "You kept going," I said. "After that, years more." "Because the work wasn't done. And because I told myself I could do it differently, more carefully, with more safeguards. I built systems, protocols for myself, ways of ensuring that I was using the capability for outcomes that were genuinely worth the cost." He shook his head slightly. "I got very good at the justification." And then, a pause longer than the others. "And then something happened that none of my systems accounted for," he said. "And I was wrong about the outcome, about the cost, profoundly wrong. And the people who paid the cost were people He stopped again. "The record classifies it as a personal threshold event." That's very clean language for something that was very not clean. "Who were they?" I asked softly. He looked at me. "Friends," he said. "They were friends." We sat in silence for a very long time after that. Not the comfortable silence of the early weeks. A different kind. The kind that sits in the space where truth has just been placed and neither person is quite sure what to do with it yet. Eventually, he got up and did what I had come to understand was his default response to difficult emotional territory. He started cooking something, small and methodical. I watched him and thought about 23-year-old Marcus Aurelius Keel in a room with people who wanted to end billions of lives, and 47-year-old Marcus Vale with flour on his forearm teaching a 20-cycle Vashari girl how to dice a root vegetable. And I thought, is this retreat? Or is this the most deliberately chosen thing he has ever done? "You know things," I said eventually, "about the Keldoran situation. You've been on this ship for 3 weeks, and I'd be willing to bet you know things about the border dispute we're heading toward that my tactical staff hasn't worked out yet." He didn't deny it. That was something. "You're not asking for my input," he said carefully. "No, I'm not," I looked at the mug in my hands. That's your choice. I'm just noting that the choice exists. He was quiet for a moment, stirring something, the sound of metal against a pan. The Keldoran dispute, he said slowly. It's not about the border. I waited. The faction pushing for the territorial claim, they don't actually want the territory. The territory is economically marginal. It would cost more to administer than it generates. He spoke carefully, deliberately, like someone choosing which door to open. What they want is the negotiation. They want to be at the table. Because there's a resource agreement being finalized in the next 12 months that the major powers in the corridor are constructing, and the faction that establishes territorial legitimacy through a border resolution gets a seat in that agreement. The border dispute is an entry ticket. I processed that. If that's true, I said, then a military response to the territorial claim is exactly wrong. A military response validates the territorial claim as a genuine security issue. It upgrades their position, makes them negotiating parties by force of attention. He paused. You'd want to find a way to give them a different kind of seat at the resource table, one that doesn't require them to establish territorial legitimacy first, something cheaper for everyone. How do you know this? I read the briefing summaries, he said, and I know the faction's history, and I know how that kind of play works. A pause. I've run that kind of play. I looked at the back of his gray-shirted shoulders. Are you going to keep cooking? I asked. For the rest of your posting, keep making food and not. Yes, he said, probably. Why? He turned around, and for the first time since I'd known him, the near smile didn't almost appear. It appeared, small and real and a little bit tired around the edges. Because I'm good at it, he said, not the strategy. The cooking, I'm actually good at the cooking. The smile faded gently. And because the people on this ship need to eat, Peshta's amino markers have improved 12% in 3 weeks. The Keth crew are sleeping better. He stopped. Me, I said. You looked rested, he said simply, for the first time since I came aboard. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, the Keldoran Resource Agreement, the faction's leadership, do you know their names? He turned back to the pan. A long pause. Yes, he said. Would you be willing to not run the play, not get involved, just brief me on the personalities, background, history? He was quiet. If I did that, he said carefully, it would have to be clearly understood, by you and by me, that any tactical or strategic information I provide is provided as historical background, not as an operational recommendation, and that it goes no further than your office. Agreed. And I stay in the kitchen. You stay in the kitchen, I said. Junior Nutrition Officer, lower deck assignment. He was quiet for another long moment. All right, he said, I'll tell you about them, what I know. He put a bowl in front of me. After you eat, he said, you haven't had a proper meal today. Part 3, the day the kitchen went to war. 14 days later, the situation changed. Not because of the Keldoran dispute. The quiet briefings Marcus gave me over 3 evenings had already reshaped my approach to that sufficiently that I'd sent the Council a revised strategic assessment that replaced our planned show-of-force deployment with a targeted diplomatic overture. The Council's response, via the liaison, was cautious interest. Serveth Don's response, which he didn't say out loud but wore on his face for a full day, was something more complicated. The situation changed because a Tethori warship appeared at the edge of our sensor range. Not a Cordyline Tethori, rogue faction. 3 ships to be precise. Coming out of the dark of the outer corridor with their weapon signatures active, not armed, but lit, the way you leave a blade unsheathed to make sure people notice it, and heading on an intercept trajectory with the Vashari Prime. The bridge went to elevated alert within 90 seconds of detection. I was on the command deck in 3 minutes. By the time I was at my station, we had the full tactical picture on the primary display, and my senior staff were giving me overlapping assessments that amounted to, we don't know what this is. Rogue Tethori faction, active weapon signatures, intercept course. The question was whether they were communicating before they were confronting. They were. A hail came in 12 minutes after they appeared on our screens. Encrypted Tethori standard, translated by our systems in real time. The message was for me specifically, by name, and it wasn't a demand or a threat. It was a question. Commander Velkan, we are told you carry a human crew member with the identifier Marcus. We wish to speak with him. We request communication. We mean no harm to your vessel. The bridge was very, very quiet. I looked at the message on the screen for a long time. Serveth Dawn, standing to my left, said, Commander, this is clearly an intelligence matter of some seriousness. The fact that a rogue Tethori faction is requesting contact with a junior kitchen crew member by name suggests this individual represents a significantly different security profile than his file indicates. Thank you, Serveth. My voice was flat. I would suggest. I said thank you. He stepped back. I thought very quickly and very carefully about a man who cooked for 700 people and taught a young girl how to dice vegetables and once sat across from people who wanted to end the world and said something that made them cry. Then I opened the internal channel to Lower Deck Kitchen. Vale, I used his current name deliberately. My office now. He came to the bridge, which is where I was, because events had moved faster than I'd anticipated. He came through the hatch still wearing the gray shirt and the apron, and there was flour on his left forearm again, and the bridge crew, 12 of my best officers, looked at him the way you look at something that doesn't compute. A cook, in an apron. Walking across the command bridge, while 3 Tethori warships sat at the edge of our sensor range. He looked at the main display. Read the Tethori vessel identifications. Something crossed his face that I hadn't seen before. Not quite recognition, deeper than that. The way you look at something you've spent years hoping not to see again. You know them, I said. I know the faction identifier. He looked at me. Not these specific ships, but the faction, yes. They've requested to speak with you. He looked back at the display. I see that, he said quietly. Is this connected to the Tethori incident? Yes, probably. The faction that didn't strike, they fractured eventually. New leadership, different factions, some aligned with the Accord. Some, he tilted his head slightly at the display. Some not. Do they want to finish what they started? I don't know, he said it honestly, not evasively. The message tone isn't aggressive. We mean no harm is a specific Tethori protocol phrase. It has a formal meaning in their diplomatic tradition. It's not just words. He paused. They mean it. But wanting to speak with me specifically, making the request through a show of force. 3 ships, weapon signatures visible, that's also a Tethori protocol. It means the matter is serious and they consider themselves with standing to demand attention. Do they have standing? He looked at me for a moment. With me, he said, probably. In a way, I'd rather not explain in front of the entire bridge crew. I looked at my crew, back at him. My office, I said, 5 minutes. In my office, with the Tethori ships sitting at the edge of our range, and my bridge crew watching the sensor feeds, and Serveth Dawn almost certainly standing close enough to the office door to be useful if I needed him. Marcus Aurelius Keel told me the part of the Tethori incident he hadn't told me before. The faction leader who had cried, the man with 40 years of military service. His name was Dath Korath. And in the conversation that had changed history, the conversation that had made Korath see the actual consequence, the actual thing, Marcus had made him a promise. Not an official promise, not a strategic one, a personal one. The kind of promise that 23-year-olds make when they've just done something they don't fully understand yet, and they're trying to find some way to make it mean something more than a tactical success. He'd promised Korath that if the faction stood down, and if the lives were preserved, and if the Accord was given a chance to build something, that the human who'd walked into that room would make sure the Tethori people were not forgotten in the building. That whatever came next would include them, not erase them. He'd kept the first half of that promise in the years that followed. He'd worked the Accord negotiations that included Tethori-aligned voices. He'd been part of the diplomatic structures that formalized Tethori participation. And then, 20 years ago, something had gone wrong and he'd disappeared from all of it. The faction identifier on those ships, he said, that's Korath's family line, his successor group. He's dead. 16 years ago, natural causes. He said it like it mattered, like Dath Korath was a real person to him, which of course he was. But his son leads the successor group, and the successor group has been fragmented for years. Some aligned with the Accord, some pushing back. The Accord hasn't made it easy for them. There have been resource agreements that excluded them, territorial decisions that disadvantaged them. He paused. The promise I made, I haven't kept the second half. So this, I said, looking at the display feed on the wall of my office, isn't a threat. No, he said, it's a reckoning. I looked at him for a long moment. What do you want to do? I asked. He was quiet. What do you want to do? He said. This is your ship. The man they want to speak to is standing in my office in a kitchen apron. The ship and the command are secondary. He looked down at the apron, almost seemed to notice it for the first time. I want to talk to them, he said finally, if you'll let me. You said you were done with this kind of work. Talking to someone who deserves to be heard isn't the same as running an operation, he said. Korath's son, he's not a threat. He's an heir to a promise that wasn't kept. That's different. A pause. And I'm 47 years old, and I'm tired of avoiding things. We established a secure communications channel to the lead Tethori ship 40 minutes later. My bridge crew watched. Servith Don watched. The Tethori faction commander, who had his father's eyes, Marcus said afterward, the same eyes exactly, appeared on the main display. And Marcus Vale, junior nutrition officer, lower deck assignment, stood in front of that screen in his gray shirt and his apron with flour on his left forearm and said, I owe you an explanation, and probably more than that. Can we talk? What followed was 40 minutes of the most quietly extraordinary diplomatic conversation I have ever witnessed. I have a council-level clearance. I have sat in on Accord negotiations. I have seen ambassadors at work, species with centuries of diplomatic tradition navigating centuries of grievance. I know what skilled diplomatic communication looks like. This was different. This wasn't skill. It was something rawer and more genuine than skill. It was a man taking responsibility for a promise made in a moment of moral emergency and acknowledging the gap between that promise and the present. It was the Tethori commander, young, maybe 30, carrying the weight of a faction in fragmentation, hearing that weight acknowledged in human language, which is a language built for exactly that kind of carrying. At no point did Marcus offer solutions. He didn't position or strategize or optimize, he just listened and spoke. And when he was wrong about something, he said he was wrong. At the 39th minute, the Tethori commander said something in Tethori that our translator system rendered as, "It is enough for now that you are found." Marcus bowed his head slightly. I know the Accord resource agreement is being finalized, he said. I don't have a seat at that table anymore, but I know people who do, and I know your people's history in that corridor better than most. I can write a brief that puts your position in terms the council can hear. I can't promise outcomes, but I can be the voice that was supposed to speak and didn't. The Tethori commander looked at him for a long moment. Why now, he asked. Why did you stop? Marcus was quiet. I made a mistake, he said. It cost people I loved. And I couldn't, for a long time, I couldn't trust my own judgment about what the cost was worth. He paused. I'm still not sure I should trust it, but I can write a brief. That feels like something I can do without being dangerous. You were never dangerous, the commander said. Not to us. I was, Marcus said gently. I was very dangerous, and the fact that I used it for things I believed were right doesn't change what it was. I think I needed to remember that before I tried to use it again. The Tethori ships withdrew from intercept course 90 minutes after they had appeared on our sensors. The bridge crew watched them go in silence. And then Peshta, who was on a secondary station, running a calibration check, who had absolutely no business being on the bridge and had clearly been there for the last hour and a half, started clapping. She was the only one for about 3 seconds. Then the rest of the crew joined her. That evening, I went down to the kitchen. He was there. The kitchen was clean and quiet, and he had a single light on over Station 4, and he was not cooking. He was just standing there, his hands on the counter, looking at nothing. I sat on my stool. He didn't turn around. You did a good thing today, I said. I started a thing today, he said. Whether it's good depends on what the council does with the brief. I'll make sure they hear it. He was quiet. Thank you, he said, for trusting me with the channel when you didn't have to. I trusted my instincts, I said, which have been telling me something about you for 6 weeks. He turned around then, looked at me. What have they been telling you? He asked. I thought about it. That you're the most careful person I've ever met, I said slowly. And that you're careful because you know what you're capable of, and that you chose this. I gestured at the kitchen, at the apron, at all of it, not as hiding, as protection, for everyone around you and maybe also for yourself. He was quiet for a long time. Yeah, he said finally, that's about right. I looked at the counter. The food outside my quarters every day, I said. You knew the schedule, knew I wasn't eating. You were watching the duty logs. I watch a lot of things, he said. Old habit. Are you going to stop? He considered. Watching probably not the food, he almost smiled. Peshta's been making that for the last 10 days. I showed her the recipe. I blinked. Peshta's been leaving food outside my quarters door. She asked if she could take over. I said yes. She needs to feel useful in ways that matter. He tilted his head slightly. She's going to be good, that kid. She's already good, she just doesn't know it yet. I thought about a 20-cycle girl who'd nearly resigned twice and now stood 3 centimeters taller and left food outside the commander's door. You did that, I said. She did that, he paused. I showed her how to dice the vegetables. Epilogue, the ending line. 3 months later, the Accord Council approved a modified framework for the Keldoran Resource Agreement that included Tethori-aligned faction representation in the outer corridor discussions. The brief that made the case for that inclusion was written by a junior nutrition officer, lower deck assignment, aboard the Vashari Prime, filed through my office with commander's endorsement, and identified only as strategic historical analysis. Serveth Don asked me once who had written it. I told him it had been compiled from existing intelligence. He accepted that. He's been less comfortable in the kitchen corridor ever since, which I've chosen to interpret as growth. Peshta was recommended for advancement to nutrition officer 2nd class by the end of the posting. She cried a little when she found out, in the good way. And Marcus Vale stayed in the kitchen. He's still there as far as I know. Another posting now, a different ship, a different assignment, because that's how the integration initiative works. I got a message 2 months after he transferred with no salutation and no signature that said only, the amino ratios for Keth biology under high exertion conditions. You'll want to watch the overnight crew. The adjustment is straightforward. I'll send the formula. He sent the formula. The overnight crew slept better. I've thought about Marcus Vale a great deal since then, about what he chose and why. About a 23-year-old who moved nations with a conversation, and a 47-year-old who chooses to move nutrition ratios. About whether those are the same person or 2 different people wearing the same face. I think they're the same person. I think that's the whole point. He once told me that rain isn't efficient, that's the point of rain. And I think what he meant, what he's been trying to live, is that not everything worth doing is efficient. Not every contribution worth making is visible. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is the small thing. The consistent, careful, unglamorous small thing. The bowl outside the door at 2 in the morning. The correct knife angle. The 2-word affirmation that makes a frightened kid stand taller. Sometimes the person who once moved nations is doing exactly that. Not because they've given up. Because they've finally understood what it's actually for. The last night he was on the Vashari Prime, he made something with that sweet charred smell, the same thing he'd been making the first night I came down. I asked him what it was called. He told me the name, an Earth word, something simple. I don't recognize the ingredients, I said. No, he said, you wouldn't, some of them don't exist anymore, I improvise. He looked at the pan. Every time it comes out a little different, but it always comes out right. I ate it. He was right, it came out right. Some things, once you truly understand them, always do. The galaxy keeps records of its wars. It names its battles and lists its commanders and builds its monuments to the decisive moments, the strategies, the turning points, the victories that are large enough to be seen from a distance. What it doesn't always record is the person who prevented the war, the conversation that stopped the strike, the 48 hours of careful human words that held back the darkness. And it certainly doesn't record what that person did afterward, how they found their way into a kitchen on a ship somewhere in the outer corridor, How they learned to make something that smells like rain on warm stone. How they looked at a frightened 20-cycle girl and said, "There you go, 2 words," and changed what she believed about herself. The galaxy keeps its monuments, but the monuments don't always know what they're standing on.